Hello everyone, welcome to today's in-depth sharing session. Today we will discuss one of the most complex, perplexing, and misunderstood countries in contemporary global geopolitics, Iran. In recent times, we have witnessed dramatic upheaval in the Middle East, from the spread of the Gaza war to the 1-2-day war between Israel and Iran, and the recent unprecedented large-scale protests in Iran initiated by ordinary citizens and bazaar merchants. We have even witnessed a historic change of leadership in the Iranian regime. Faced with these dazzling crises, the Western strategic community often feels frustrated, wondering why can't maximum pressure and military deterrence bring Tehran to its knees? Why does the regime's behavior seem so irrational? The answer lies in the fact that we cannot understand the current Iranian regime using the traditional logic of Western national actors. Today, I will take you on a dissection. We will view political ideology as a biological mechanism, examining how this ideology was imposed on the host of Persian civilization like a graft, and why this host is experiencing a violent rejection reaction today. Please look at the big screen. This is not just a map, it's a biological metaphor we're analyzing today. From bottom to top, we see three layers. The bottom layer is the geographical substrate, consisting of the Zagros Mountains and the vast plateau. The middle layer is a deep yellow cultural genome, representing the ancient Persian civilization with a history of 2,500 years. And the top layer, the black and red structure covered with neural networks, is the ideological superstructure that was grafted onto this country through the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Our task today is to trace how the regime's software, ideology, and hardware state apparatus have progressed from its initial revolutionary series to its current systemic decay. To understand Iran, we must correct one of the most common sense mistakes. Iranians are not Arabs. The Islamic Republic attempted to forcibly graft a transnational Islamic identity onto a completely different Persian cultural host. However, the genetic phenotypes of these two civilizations are entirely different. Please see the right side, the Arabic-Islamic context, phenotype B. Arab cultural identity is closely tied to the revelations of the Quran. Arabic is the language God transmitted to the Prophet Muhammad, and every character is sacred. In artistic expression, Arabic art features strictly geometric patterns and forbids idolatry. That is, it does not depict human faces. But look to the left. Persian identity, phenotype A. Persian belongs to the Indo-European language family, and Persian civilization boasts a history of 2,500 years, predating the birth of Islam. Where does Persian identity come from? From Cyrus the Great's columns, from the secular poetry of Hafiz in the 14th century, and from the epic poems of the Shahnameh. In classical Persian art, you'll see numerous vivid faces, drinking parties, and women playing music and dancing. The Persians were a more secular, open, and inclusive people than the surrounding Arab civilizations. Therefore, Islam was historically a foreign religion to the Persians. It wasn't until the Safavid dynasty in 1501 that Shia Islam became the state religion of Persia. This history of culture often superseding religious dogma is the deep-seated cultural root of the internal conflicts in Iran today. Since we've mentioned Shia Islam, let's take a look at what this religion originally looked like. For over 1,000 years, traditional Shia Islam has operated as a waiting state. This is because Shia Islam believes that the only legitimate ruler is the bloodline of the Prophet, and that the 12th true leader, Imam, has entered a state of seclusion and will only return at the end of the world. Therefore, throughout these long periods, Shia clerics, ayatollahs, played only the role of spiritual guides and never became involved in secular political rule. Political power was considered secular and impure. More importantly, because Shia Muslims constitute only about 10% of the Muslim world, and have historically suffered persecution. They have developed a survival mechanism called a taqiyya, which allows the concealment of one's true beliefs in order to survive when one's life is threatened. In other words, traditional Shia Islam is ascetic, compromising, and pacifist. However, note the sharply rising red line on the far right of the chart. In 1979, everything was shattered. Revolutionary ideologies and active resistance, such as Khomeini's theories, completely overturned this theological baseline. This leads to our core question: how did Khomeini seize power in 1979? Why did an extremely conservative cleric receive such fervent support from secular leftists, feminists, and even postmodern intellectuals like Foucault in the West? Because what was born in 1979 was a mutated hybrid. See the chart. Khomeini and another thinker trained at the Sorbonne University in France, Ali Chariati, underwent a political genetic splicing. First, they absorbed radical Marxism-Leninism from the 20th century. They cleverly mapped Marx's concept of class struggle onto the Islamic concept of jihad, repackaging the exploited proletariat as the oppressed Mustazafin in the Quran. Secondly, they absorbed Fanon's third worldism and anti-colonialism, believing that violence against Western imperialism was not only a political means, but also a purification ritual that could restore national dignity. Finally, Shariati vehemently attacked the traditional black Shia, that is to say, the compromising, ascetic Shia, and advocated a red Shia that pursued justice and revolution. These three ideologies, stitched together, formed a modern political religion. The Western left saw anti-imperialism and anti-capitalism, while the clergy held the key to seizing power. This is the essence of the 1979 Red-Green Alliance, leftists and Islamists being two-faced. Now that the ideology is established, how exactly is it governed? This is Khomeini's most groundbreaking theological innovation, ruled by the jurist Velayat-e Faqih. As this diagram shows, since the true hidden imam is no longer in the world, Khomeini declared that a cleric, faqih, well-versed in Islamic law, should act as his representative to take over secular political power. This move bridged the gap between the sacred and the secular, transforming the cleric from a spiritual guide into the absolute ruler of the secular state. In traditional Shia doctrine, this is actually a structural heresy. He was essentially borrowing the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood's modern political concept of establishing an Islamic government to cloak his dictatorship in a sacred guise. Ladies and gentlemen, the next page contains the key to understanding the current Middle East conflict and why Western deterrence has failed against Iran. We call it Muqawama, meaning the doctrine of resistance. The logic of this operating system is very unique. Resistance is not about achieving military victory in the traditional sense. It is itself a perpetual state of being. Please look at this loop. Initiate an asymmetrical struggle, incurring the enemy's revenge, suffering destruction and destruction. This destruction was transformed into a sacred martyrdom. Ultimately, they validated their own moral righteousness, achieved a spiritual victory, and recruited more followers, spiritual victory, and recruitment. Western strategic thinking assumes that nations are rational and fear the threat of aircraft carriers and missiles. However, within this logic, material destruction actually validates their psychological narrative. The win or die mentality means that the word defeat simply doesn't exist in their vocabulary. As long as you can withstand unlimited destruction, you can wear down the enemy. Relying on this doctrine of resistance, Iran has established a mechanism for exporting forward defense. Tehran does not directly intervene, but rather establishes a network of militias throughout the Middle East through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, the so-called Arc of Resistance or Ring of Fire. But this map reveals a key distinction. Hezbollah in Lebanon is an ideological clone, sharing the same Shia theological DNA as Iran, and is deeply intertwined with it, while Hamas in Gaza is Sunni, and they are transactional, strategic partners formed only because they share a common enemy, Israel. Similarly, the Houthi rebels in Yemen and the militias in Iraq also act as nerve endings, projecting power for Iran throughout the region. However, this system has a fatal internal contradiction, or rather, an autoimmune disease. On a narrative level, left image, the Islamic Republic peddles an anti-imperialist myth to left-wing intellectuals in Western universities and to countries in the global South. It portrays itself as an oppressed Mustazafin, clenching its fists and confronting the Western colonial behemoths. However, in reality, right image, it is pursuing a brutal imperial expansion program in the Levant region, including Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, using force to suppress people abroad. For example, in the Syrian civil war, Iranian-backed armed groups caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Muslims. This extreme hypocrisy of claiming to be a victim while playing the role of an oppressor has been thoroughly exposed in the Arab world and within Iran. Ideological fanaticism must ultimately be paid for by the state itself. 50 years later, this state has suffered from comprehensive socio-economic decay. Please see Patience, Vital Signs. Figures A and B illustrate the catastrophic collapse of the Iranian rial against the US dollar and the hyperinflation that has soared to over 45% for years. Khomeini once promised free electricity and water and reduced income inequality. Today, Iran, possessing world-class oil and gas resources, frequently experiences even basic water and electricity outages. Even more devastating is the mafia economy of Figure C. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not only the military, but also monopolizes the country's ports, telecommunications, and import-export lifelines. Iran even has 4 different exchange rate systems specifically designed to funnel wealth to interest groups close to the core of the regime. This kleptocracy, disguised as revolution, completely destroyed the private economy and bazaar merchant class that served as its foundation. Faced with such necrosis, the host begins to reject the substance. Compare these two petri dish images. Figure 1. In dish 1, the year 1979. The alliance that overthrew the king was very broad. Red Marxists, green traditional Muslims, and secular intellectuals representing Persian civilization together formed the base of the revolution. But by dish 2, the reality in 2026, that broad alliance had completely disintegrated. According to VPN data and independent polls, over 70% of the Iranian population wants the regime to step down and desires radical change. Today, the Islamic Republic has been stripped down to a hardline core of about 15%, isolated from the rest of society, and maintaining its rule solely through the violent state apparatus and the military-industrial hardware. This rejection reaction can be clearly seen in the mutations of the Iranian dissident movement over the past decade or so. Year 2, 009 Green Movement. The slogan was, "Where is my vote?" The protesters were mainly urban intellectuals who sought reformism within the system and believed they could engage in dialogue with the leadership. Year 2019, Bloody November. The surge in gasoline prices triggered nationwide economic unrest. Year 2022, Hair and Freedom. The women's life liberty movement, sparked by the death of Martha Amini, saw large numbers of women removing their headscarves. This was a cultural rejection of the regime's ideology, and the slogan became "Death to the Dictator." Year 2026 Empty Plate. At this very moment, the main body of the protests has become small vendors and the poor who live on pensions. Their slogans are nationalist and survival-oriented. "I don't want Gaza, I don't want Lebanon, my life belongs to Iran." The base of the protests has shifted from the former elites to the regime's original protected class. They are no longer seeking reform, but demanding a complete abandonment of the system. If the internal economic collapse emptied the foundation, then the external military defeat crushed the last pillar. We see this central pillar representing the regime as a support and shield. originally protected by an external network of proxies known as the Ring of Fire. However, during the 1-2-day war in June 2025, the Israeli military systematically destroyed Hezbollah's command network and conducted precision strikes on Iranian facilities. During those 12 days, the Iranian Air Force did not take off, and the supreme leader remained perfectly hidden. This conflict has brutally demonstrated to the people of the Middle East and Iran that the Iranian regime is a paper tiger in terms of conventional military strength. The proxy shield has been dismantled, the hammer of external pressure has fallen, and the foundation has been shattered by internal protests. Why has the current Iranian leadership shown even a hint of weakness in the face of protests? Because they fear the collapse of the regime at this moment, the death of its ideology, even more than they fear physical war. In daily life, the regime's authority has vanished. A silent revolution is unfolding in Iran. Take a look at these illustrations. Figure 2. Although the law mandating the wearing of headscarves remains in effect, large numbers of women in the streets of Tehran have openly removed their headscarves. Young people are posting dance videos on blocked social media platforms, engaging in widespread civil disobedience. The most ironic aspect is the elite hypocrisy. Ordinary people are arrested for violating religious law, while the children of high-ranking Revolutionary Guard officials enjoy lavish Western-style weddings and secular lives in Western countries without headscarves. This extreme hypocrisy completely strips the theocratic rule of its moral legitimacy, leading to a total paralysis of the regime's law enforcement. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the final diagnosis. The ideological synthesis of 1979 was a complete failure. The current Iranian regime is a zombie ideology. As shown in this image, the heavy machine representing the doctrine of resistance is being violently pushed outward by the deep yellow host body, the ancient Iranian and Persian civilization. This doctrine demands that people make endless sacrifices, martyrdom, for a meaningless transnational holy war, for the destruction of Israel. However, the host, the Iranian people, refuses to die for a reason they no longer believe in. Life is not martyrdom, not a grave. Life is a cafe, a bazaar, a well-functioning country. The regime is dead in the hearts of the people and is now only maintaining its operations through violence. The trajectory of this country is undergoing a painful but inevitable transformation. They are returning from an imposed Islamic Republic to a true Iran. Finally, the framework of this analysis benefits from the integration of multidimensional perspectives. As you can see on the screen, we referenced the in-depth analysis in the Reading Without Forest podcast series on Israel's strikes against Iran, the reshaping of Gulf geopolitics, and the subversion of Shia theology. We borrowed Ali Shariati's theory of red and black Shia, Colin Powell's furniture store rule of war reconstruction, break it and you pay for it, and Foucault and Fanon's critical perspectives on violence and the biopolitics of purification. Most importantly, we view this political ideology as a biological mechanism that explains why the Iranian people today have such a resolute rejection reaction to the regime that has ruled for nearly half a century. The fog of history will eventually be dispelled by the sunlight of time. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening.